what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, October 26th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So let's get right back to P-Gate. I guess that's the name everybody's kind of settled on now for this dossier scandal. And there's no way they're going to be able to keep this under control. And we're already starting to see cracks forming within the Democratic Party, even within the corporate media. Everybody's getting ready to bail. The first of the dominoes have started to fall already. This thing is not going to stop anytime soon. And Donald Trump is out there, understandably, criticizing the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign for funding this Russia dossier. There are now 5 investigations in Congress looking into this and various aspects, as well they should. So they're not going to be able to control all of this. Obama himself is now the target of 2 congressional investigations regarding the handling of the email scandal and various other issues, and his possible involvement in the Uranium One deal as well. So this is spreading rapidly. Now, there's a little bit of good news. Okay, we were criticizing Attorney General Jeff Sessions for keeping that FBI informant gagged. Well, that has now changed. The Department of Justice has lifted the gag order on the Uranium One informant. He is now free to testify before Congress. So this is going to get really, really dicey. They haven't identified him. That's a good thing, because he might wind up in Fort Marcy Park somewhere. But right now, what we're starting to see is the Democratic Party, both the old guard and the new guard, are now distancing themselves from Hillary. They're not saying it didn't happen. They're saying they had no idea that it was going on here. So we've got Tom Perez and the new Democratic National Committee disavowed all knowledge of the infamous Trump dossier. And now Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the old DNC are saying, no, we didn't know about it. We had absolutely no idea this was going on. So the rats are leaving the sinking ship, and Hillary is finding her support mechanism is starting to collapse. Now, part of the coup is now exposed because Clinton colluded with the British, because it was this British intelligence that put forward this fabricated claim in the beginning to come up with all of this information. Now, apparently at one point, according to this article that came out of LaRouchePAC.com, apparently the dossier was used in an attempt to blackmail President Trump into changing his views on potential friendly relations with Russia by claiming Putin held sexually compromising information on Trump. Now, supposedly, the president refused the blackmail and extortion attempt, and that's when they basically put it out into the news media to try and sabotage relations between the United States and Russia. Now, at this point, we know that the relations between Trump and Putin aren't all that cozy, and it's a very alarming thing for most of us paying attention to the situation here. Now, over on the Wall Street Journal, they're starting to ask a real serious question here. Did the FBI use manufactured fake information to trigger the Trump probe, to get a FISA warrant based on this complete made-up dossier? Because if that was the entire basis of the FISA warrant, well, that's fraud. And it would invalidate the warrant, would invalidate anything they found with it, but then they weren't looking for anything they could take into a court of law. They were looking for anything they could leak to the media to damage Donald Trump. So politics is dirty. We all know that. And Trump just got a lesson in just how dirty those politics can be. All right, let's grab a quick phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, Mike, did you hear anything about Perkins Cole Law Firm, which is funneled the money from probably Hillary Clinton's, the Clinton Foundation, and then they would give the money to the Fusion GPS to hire Chris Steele, that MI6. He worked at the Russian Bureau, I believe, or the Russian desk, right, in Britain?
Yes.
And Yeah, so like, so you see how these spider webs just, they go everywhere.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like it's just so ingrained in in not only in our government but in the British government. They're going to do anything that they can to get rid of Trump. You know, like him or hate him. Yeah, this is the kind of dirty tricks, and then the whole dossier was made up. Now who made up the original dossier? Like who? You know, I'm hearing Jeb Bush, Mike. I'm hearing Jeb, because remember they said one of the people that the 16 Republican presidential candidates is involved in this. So I'm hearing Jeb Bush or the Bush family. Remember Barbara Bush wanted, she was making phone calls from what I heard, trying to get everybody on board. They go get Trump. So the Bush family is involved in this.
Of course they are.
How it leads.
Of course they are. They're tangled up with the Clintons and that whole government-sanctioned gun and drug running back in Arkansas in the 1980s. That's what's binding them all together. This goes way beyond the dossier and way beyond the Clinton Foundation. We're looking at the heart of the narcocracy. And yeah, that's why all of a sudden all the Bushes are coming on out and they're making their statements, and they're basically dragging everybody's out there. They're all in a panic because when this particular pile of manure hits the ventilation system, everybody's going to get splattered.
Yeah, but Mike, you had a phone call from a woman yesterday. She said, we're winning and stuff. This is not the time to be greedy and thinking we're winning. We're at a dangerous point now.
Yes.
I mean, because these people are going to try. Let me tell you, if more stuff starts coming out, these people are going to pull some kind of, false flag or something to take the mind off of what's going on. Because this is a big story.
Yes.
This is a dangerous time we're in. I mean, hey, Mike, I also want to talk about that Halpern guy from MSNBC who they fired for sexual harassment. So there's a battle going on right now in Washington between nationalism and globalism, and I think this Hollywood thing also has to do with that, Mike. Maybe in the small spot of the sexual harassment, but I think it's all somehow interconnected at this particular time and moment in time.
Well, I think
that's just my opinion.
I think maybe the Hollywood sex scandal, because Hollywood's always been like this. This is nothing new, this kind of behavior. But I think it's been thrown out there because in the hope that it will distract people from the Uranium One deal. It's not really working. We're covering both of those stories, but we're keeping the focus on Uranium One. But you're right, it is a very dangerous time. I think anybody working in the independent media or even the corporate media who's covering the story needs to be very concerned about their personal safety. As I was mentioning yesterday on the show, these people are desperate enough and have the resources to even attempt to actually assassinate President Trump. And I hope his security people are really paying attention because they're playing with what effectively amounts to one of the most powerful organized crime groups in history. And, killing world leaders is something that they're sort of used to doing all along. Look at how they're going after Assad, how they went after Gaddafi, how they went after Saddam Hussein. So they won't hesitate. If they really think, if they can't get a lid on this thing, if they can't distract everybody from it, if it looks like there are going to be indictments, one of two things will happen. There'll be an assassination attempt on the president, or there'll be a bug out where all of the key players in all of this are just going to leave the country, heading for someplace without extradition all at the same time. And as somebody confirmed to us yesterday, most of the wealth of the Clinton Foundation is already offshore in these satellite foundations, these shell foundations. So the money's already outside the country. Bill and Hill could just hop on a plane and be out of here, and that would be the last we'd see of them.
Yeah, the money could be also in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, because she did a lot of business dealings with them. Hey, Mike, there's another thing. They can try to do some kind of a mass terror attack, and then wave the flag, and everybody will forget about P-Gate or whatever, But these people will do that because they arm terrorists that kill men, women, children, and old people and babies in Syria. And they lie about
but the question
Iraq,
is, a new false flag terror attack is probably not going to work. I mean, look how the Las Vegas thing cratered. They didn't get any traction with that at all, and they're still trying pathetically to find some way they can reassert the official story. Nobody's paying attention to them anymore. We're not even really looking at anything about Las Vegas anymore. You know, it was an obvious false flag. Boom, done. Let's move on. Uranium One, P-Gate. Let's focus on the important things.
Yep, but like I said, dangerous. When an animal gets cornered, you do not let down your guard. These people will strike back, and they'll strike back hard.
Absolutely.
I just want to let people know that, you know, don't let your guard down. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Dustin. We're going to let you go. No, Dustin's absolutely correct here right now. Anybody who's covering this story in the independent media or the corporate media, you need to double down on your personal security and make sure all your alarms are set and your TV cameras are working because, yeah, these people are now desperate, and they will do anything they think it's going to take to try and keep the story under control. I mean, they've been pounding on my website server, and I know who it's coming from because the DOSers are always targeting those Hillary Clinton files, which we'll be talking about a little bit later in the show. Meanwhile, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So getting on back to it, even the Washington Post is starting to break ranks and basically say, yeah, it's time to deal with this P-Gate dossier. And basically, Trump is out there saying, and he's been saying all along, it was made up. They paid a lot of money for it. And Hillary Clinton denied it. The Democrats denied it. And now, only because it's going to come out in a court case, they admitted, yes, they did it. And they're embarrassed by it. But it's a really sad commentary on politics in this country. Well, Mr. Trump, it's kind of always been that way. And I learned that one the hard way back in 1994. Now, Greg Jarrett is out there saying right now Hillary Clinton can be charged with 13 different crimes. All of them are under Title 18 and does not include that complaint filed with the Federal Elections Commission that funding that dossier and not reporting it amounts to an election law violation. But she's guilty of bribery, acts affecting a personal financial interest, conspiracy, false statements, frauds and swindles, fraud by wire, attempt and conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, destruction, alteration, or falsification of records in a federal investigation, perjury, disclosure of confidential information, unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents or materials, and even James Comey said she was guilty of that one, concealment, removal, or mutilation of government records, attempt to evade or defeat a tax, in other words, using the Clinton Foundation for personal purposes, and attempts to interfere with the administration of the Internal Revenue laws. And that comes from when she was calling the IRS on behalf of UBS and trying to get them off the hook. So that's what they've got on her so far. And now that it's all coming on out, and it looks like Hillary might be up for some indictments, I think it's time that we go back and we look at some of these other questions from the past. First and foremost, and this relates to that email server, was Hillary Clinton selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests using her weak email server and using the Clinton Foundation to collect and launder the money? Because at the height of this whole thing with the Secretary of State, almost half the money pouring into the Clinton Foundation came from foreign sources. And the Clintons did this all back in 1998, when Bill Clinton was running for re-election. They did this all over again. Bill Clinton used his authority as president to authorize the sale of very sensitive technology with military applications to China, and at the same time, Chinese money was being funneled into his re-election campaign fund. And they used Chinese American citizens to make it all look like it was above board. But when the investigators talked to these Chinese citizens, it turned out, yeah, the money was coming from China, including Chinese intelligence. And the scandal was called Chinagate, and it should have been prosecuted. But sadly, the email server at the White House broke down, the disks were destroyed, and there was no backup. So that was the end of that situation. But the Clintons have done this before. And so it's a legitimate question, and it needs to be asked, and it deserves to be answered. Was Hillary Clinton using her private email server with very weak security to send classified U.S. information to foreign interests in exchange for donations to her charitable foundation? That needs to be looked at. And by the way, there's another question I have here. It's been established by Charles Ortel that the Clinton Charitable Foundation did not do enough charity to qualify as a tax-exempt nonprofit organization. Why has the IRS not gone after them and said, you owe us the taxes on all that money? Well, because Hillary can blackmail the entire government over that gun and drug running by the CIA back in Arkansas. Then there's the other story way back, the one that got me blacklisted out of Hollywood, the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. That needs to be gone back into. It was clear it was not a suicide, and the depths to which the system sank to protect itself, I think, was exemplified when Alan Favish took a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit all the way to the United States Supreme Court to get the crime scene photos of Vincent Foster to confirm the paper trail that there was, in fact, a second gunshot wound on the body, which would undermine the claim of a suicide. And the Supreme Court ruled against Alan Favish literally on the principle that dead people have a right to privacy. That's how ridiculous it got in keeping this cover-up going here. And there's a lot more than that we could look at. I mean, all the stuff that was going on in Arkansas, the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, and again, back to that actual gun and drug running operation by the CIA under then Governor Bill Clinton. That should be opened up for all of America to see. Now, the corporate media is starting to show a divide on this. ABC, still loyal, gives just seconds to the Clinton funding of the dossier, spent 10 minutes on Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting, which turned out, again, nothing actually happened. The meeting was all about the Magnitsky Act and nothing else. Now, since the inauguration, CNN has mentioned Russia over 16,000 times, and so far has spent a total of about 4 minutes on the Clinton Uranium One scandal. Now, do you remember back when Donald Trump suggested that the Democrats were behind this P-Gate dossier? CNN came on out and said, oh, he's just being a conspiracy theorist. He's got his Twitter account and he knows how to use it, and he's just a wacko conspiracy theorist. Well, I think CNN owes the White House, owes Donald Trump, a huge apology. Now that it's turned out that, yes, in point of fact, the paper trail is there. The DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign paid this law firm to hire Fusion GPS, who hired Christopher Steele, who just concocted this dossier out of thin air. So we're starting to see some segments of the media, like the Washington Post. They're turning on Hillary. It's damage control. They're now realizing that if they try and go on protecting Hillary Clinton, they risk the entire government and corporate media structure. The question is how to get Hillary to step down gracefully and not blow the whistle on all the other skullduggery that's been going on by this government for the last 30 years. Meanwhile, Democratic Representative Schiff is still out there saying that the Uranium One probe, it's just a distraction. It's being pushed by the White House. It's being pushed by Breitbart. It's being pushed by Fox News. And this was on MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell Reports. Basically say, oh, it's no big deal. Really, you shouldn't pay any attention to this at all. Really, we have to go back to Trump and Russia. Trump and Russia, that's the real story. There's nothing there. Even Dianne Feinstein has admitted, after one of the most intense and expensive investigations in U.S. history, they found absolutely nothing to substantiate the claim that there was collusion between Russia and Trump. All the collusion was between Russia and Hillary Clinton. And they're trying to pretend that that didn't happen. This is blowing up in their face. I mean, there aren't enough eggs in this country for all those media faces that deserve to have egg all over their face for all the lies they've been feeding us. By the way, apparently experts are saying the United States really needed that 20% of the uranium ore that Hillary sold to Russia in exchange for bribes. It wasn't a surplus. It wasn't something that we weren't using anyway. And that may be why we're in Niger right now trying to make up that shortfall. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Mark in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay.
You're on the air.
Guess not.
You're on the air.
Can you not hear me?
I hear you.
Can you not hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, you hear me now? Good.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's see. There's something else I wanted to bring up to you after I address. This is a joke, a little adult theme, no no foul language or anything. But, they got all this massive amounts of money, and basically this is a joke. This is just a joke, and it's one of those as you sow, so shall you reap jokes. So I think you can appreciate this, that there's a rumor that Bill Clinton has AIDS, but there's another rumor that Bill Clinton went on this sexual safari throughout Asia and went to visit all these different brothels, and he came back, and when he went to the restroom to urinate, there were green and purple spots all over his manhood.
Yeah, I really don't think. I know it's a joke. Let's skip.
You don't want to go there?
No, I don't want to go there. Let's skip the joke and get on to what you wanted to share with us.
Okay. I got a call from this guy who was soliciting funds for police benevolence, and I tried to raise the issue because one thing that has concerned me is the civil asset forfeiture that basically if a cop pulls this and he doesn't have enough sense to know, excuse me, this is color of law, you're violating people's rights, you're just a thief with a badge. If a cop gets injured or killed, and I can't really say it's in the line of duty, this is obviously a violation of people's rights, right? But I wanted to raise the issue of asset forfeiture with him, and I'm like, look, I don't know if it's happened. It wouldn't surprise me at all if somebody, some cop tries pulling civil asset forfeiture and somebody, may pull his own gun, the cop's sidearm and shoot him with it. And, if I were on the jury, I'd have to say, excuse me, dum-dum, you had that coming. You're a thief with a badge. If you have any moral compass at all, you know that this is wrong. You can't take somebody's property without due process, without a reasonable suspicion he's committed a crime. And when I tried, that's what I wanted to talk about is I appreciate your concern about cops getting injured and if they're getting injured, violating people's rights. Are you people going to do anything about having a moral framework of saying we're not going to violate people's rights, kind of like the Oath Keepers and that kind of thing? And he just said, we'll just take your name off the list. I don't know, maybe he just wanted to get on to the next call, but he didn't want to discuss it with me. I take it you can appreciate that if somebody has a civil asset forfeiture fraud perpetrated on them, they are pretty much within their right saying, no, you don't either. Right?
Well,
I think that if you were on the jury, you might be more sympathetic with the victim of civil asset forfeiture than the cop who might get injured or killed in the line of, I can't say in the line of duty, in the line of thievery, right?
Well, I tend to agree with you, but unfortunately, the laws are written to basically say the police can, in fact, do this. Now, there is, of course, a Supreme Court decision, John Bad Elk versus the United States, which basically came on down. The Supreme Court said that if law enforcement is engaged in conduct that is outside the letter of the law and the Constitution, you do have a right to resist up to and including the use of lethal force. Unfortunately, in today's political climate, I don't think the courts would go along with that. I think the attitude of the courts right now is you do as you're told.
Yeah, and that's the problem is that I think that the real solution is we need a class action lawsuit and we need to embarrass the body politic. It's like, how can you carpetbaggers enact such, this is actually called color of law. Anything that's called law that is in violation of the principle that people have to be informed, they have to know what they're getting into and agree to it. And if people knew anything about this, they only agreed, well, we got to do something about this drug dealers. Yeah, really? How about, all these big pharma that are pumping out medications that have this paradigm that, hey, as long as we can make money from our multi-billion plants, and if it's something you can grow in your own backyard, it's not science.
Okay. Well, listen, we're almost to the commercial break here, but we're almost to the commercial break. I just want to say this: the issue is civil forfeiture was sold as a means to punish criminals, and instead it's being used on law-abiding, innocent American citizens. Anyway, we got to let you go, Mark.
And
we got to do.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Fox News is going on and on about the impending release of the last of the classified documents in the John F. Kennedy assassination. And frankly, I'm not expecting there to be anything. They have had decades to sanitize and, if necessary, fabricate documents and replace them. I mean, look at the extents they went to cover this up when it all happened. Look at all the strange deaths like Dorothy Kilgallen. Apparently, John F. Kennedy's brain, which was preserved in formalin, that disappeared. So I'm not expecting there to be anything, and I view it as a distraction. I'm sure people will be looking at it with some interest, but I'm not expecting there to be any bombshell revelations in there. Besides which, again, the House Select Committee on Assassinations did conclude there had been a conspiracy, because the acoustic data from Dealey Plaza indicated more than one shooter was present. So, again, like Las Vegas, it's over and done with. We know we were lied to. We know there was an assassination. There was a conspiracy. Let's focus on what's happening right here and now today. The Uranium One scandal, the P-Gate dossier, the pedophilia scandals, and on and on and on. We got to keep our focus going here. Now, getting back onto domestic politics, apparently President Trump has named a new IRS commissioner to replace John Koskinen. And basically, this is in response to the fact that the IRS was targeting conservatives during the Obama administration, and for the most part, they got away with it. Remember Lois Lerner, and all the information was supposed to be on her hard drive, and oh, golly gee whiz, the dog ate my hard drive, and we recycled the backup tape, and we just fired the company that was doing the backups anyway, so, gee, the evidence is all gone. And basically, Trump is starting to clean out the IRS, because the IRS fired a lot of people, supposedly over this scandal, and then quickly rehired them. Basically, they got a vacation. They got a nice vacation for doing what they did, and then they got their old jobs back. Now, a federal lawsuit has charged Dr. Margaret Hamburg, the former commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, with conspiracy, racketeering, and colluding to conceal deadly drug dangers under the RICO law. And basically, this lawsuit was filed on behalf of 8 plaintiffs who claim they've suffered severe harm by ingesting the drug Levaquin, whose deadly side effects were concealed by the FDA to protect financial interests. It's another reason why you shouldn't trust any of these government agencies to tell you what's safe or harmful, or what you should be eating or not eating, or what medicines you should use or not use. They're all compromised by the financial interests. They see themselves as working in partnership with big agriculture, big pharma. They're not really here for the interests of the people. They're basically sales tools. Yes, you can take this medication. The FDA has approved it. Meanwhile, the FDA tries to stamp down on any small up-and-coming companies and say, oh, no, you can't have that on the market. FDA's out there leading the fight against medical marijuana. And on November 1st, we're going to have Don Wiskin from Extendivite who's going to be on the show. Apparently, up there in Canada, he just went through a big runaround with their government agencies who are trying to basically shut his product down, and he's prevailed, and I'll let him give you the details of that. That's on November 1st here. Now, story coming out of blacklisted news, the U.S. is now widening surveillance, warrantless surveillance, to include homegrown violent extremists. And this story is originally out of Reuters. And basically what it's saying is that even people who have no known connection to foreign terrorists are now permitted for collection of information without bothering with a warrant, for counterintelligence purposes. All of this, of course, completely unconstitutional. All of it at whim, as it were. Now, again, coming up on November 8th, the Antifa and the Snowflakes in general are planning their civil war to drive Donald Trump and Mike Pence out of the White House. Personally, I don't think they're going to get that many people to show up. So basically what it's going to amount is they're going to scream helplessly at the sky that Empress Hillary has been cheated of her rightful plunder of the Oval Office, as it were. And again, as disappointing as Donald Trump has been on the war issue and on the jail Hillary issue, so far that may be changing. We dodged a bullet by keeping Hillary out of that Oval Office. She would have been so much, much, much worse. But again, we're looking at the reality that picking the lesser of two evils every 4 years is still evil, and it's a stupid way to be running a country. So that's coming up on November 8th. Now, let's get into the war zones here. The U.S.-backed forces basically have won the oil race on the eastern bank of the Euphrates and have seized control of the oil and gas infrastructure located in the area. And of course, they're going to hang on to it. It's very obvious at this point that even though the war is all but over, ISIS is almost out there, that the U.S. is planning on hanging on to that territory of partitioning Syria, even as they were out there saying that Kurdistan shouldn't break off and Catalonia shouldn't break off. They're out there saying, let's break off the part of Syria with the oil and we'll keep control of that. And Tillerson is back out there making comments about how the reign of the Assad family in Syria is coming to an end, and the only issue is how that can be brought about. Now, these comments were made following a meeting with United Nations envoy Stefan de Mistura in Geneva. And Tillerson is out there saying the United States wants a whole and unified Syria with no role for Bashar al-Assad in the government. Now, of course, Assad has won his last few elections by huge, huge margins. So the U.S. government has now dropped that pretext about being in Syria to fight ISIS and al-Qaeda, because that didn't work, and now they're back to, we have to get Assad out. Well, Mr. Tillerson, it's not up to you. It's technically up to the Syrian people at the ballot box, and frankly, their elections seem to be a lot more honest than ours are. But they're grasping at straws. The only way they're going to get Assad out is with a decapitation strike, and that would be seen by pretty much everybody on the planet is an unprovoked act of war. The only justification, or the only reason they want Assad out is he won't do what the U.S. wants him to do. That's really what it all comes down to. Now, getting on back to Niger, and everybody's scratching their head and saying, what the heck is going on? Why are we in Niger? Why is Niger the hub of our operations in Western Africa? What's going on? Well, Niger has a lot of resources, including uranium. And now we're hearing that 20% of the U.S. uranium that was transferred into Russian hands in exchange for those very generous donations to the Clinton Foundation was not a surplus, that we really needed it. And that may be one of the reasons we're in Niger. But we're in Africa in general to basically capture all of those undeveloped natural resources and, of course, to deny Russia and China access to those same resources. And Trump is now trying to explain away the fact that they were in Niger, and Congress didn't know about it, by saying that he had authorized the generals to do what they thought were right. In other words, he's transferred the war policy away from the civilian leadership to the Pentagon, which was never intended by the founding fathers. And so we probably have wars in all kinds of places we don't know about yet. So there's the natural resources. There's the use of Niger as a hub for drone strikes into other countries. Ron Paul has come on out and said basically right now, as of this moment, the U.S. military is occupying 53 of 54 African nations. In other words, the conquest of Africa is all but complete. And we never saw it. Now, all right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Tom in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I got a couple questions on Hillary, if you bear with me.
Mm-hmm.
If Hillary was to die, would she be buried at Arlington Cemetery? And if she was, would she be next to Benghazi casualties? Another thing is, if Hillary sings like a canary, will the Hollywood people give her a Tony be her cellmate? And then there was a question I have to ask is how much did the Russians actually pay for the uranium? We know how much they paid for the bribes, but nobody's ever put out how much did they pay the U.S. Treasury for the uranium they got.
They didn't actually pay the U.S. Treasury anything. It was the Canadian company that acquired the leaseholds And I presume that the money goes to the owners of the land. And then Rosatom wanted to buy that company, the Canadian company. That's when it became a federal issue where it should have been blocked. And again, the uranium is a key component of nuclear weapons. Look at what a big stink they're making about North Korea and Iran and nuclear weapons. And then here's Hillary Clinton facilitating the sale of all this uranium into the hands of Russia, who is now free to sell it to any other country on earth, including ones who do not like us. So it was a very hypocritical thing to do. As far as where Hillary would be buried, if she were to die at this point, I don't really care. But if she starts to sing, and believe it or not, she's already won a Grammy for the audiobook version of It Takes a Village. So Hollywood just loves to shower all kinds of awards all over here. But that's what everybody's afraid of, is that Hillary will start basically ratting out everything that's been going on since Arkansas in the 1980s. That's the hammer that she's held over everybody's head that allows the Clintons to just get away with what they're getting away with. You mess with us, we'll bring the whole government down by revealing that the government is the biggest drug seller on the streets of America.
Yeah, so she'll probably get a Tony then, right?
Who knows what she's going to get? I mean, the instant she starts to do that, she's lost her leverage in terms of being able to stay alive. So I don't know how this is going to resolve out.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you. We're going to switch over to Bruce in Texas. Aloha, Bruce. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, aloha, Michael. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
Super. Hey, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing Hillary, if she should, pass away, be married with, Osama bin Laden taxi driver he threw in the water. I think that'd be pretty appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But just a segue into maybe a different topic. I don't know what type of a cell phone or mobile phone usage you have, but, it really irks me that, I moved away from TV and onto the Internet because I don't want to pay someone to lie to me,
Yes.
And so now I'm paying for bandwidth, and it seems like I've changed phones, changed carriers several times, and I notice a trend that once I go to certain sites over and over again or make certain phone calls, like the RBN, my bandwidth goes up, but I'm not using any more of it, and there are apps that you can't disable that seem to be like maybe little spyware that's pre-planted, and it's just eating up your bandwidth, and you're paying for it.
Well, yeah, you are. Now, fortunately, the good news is, due to public pressure, most of the cell phone companies are going back to unlimited plans. They're moving away from metered usage because people were just not going for that one at all. And so you can get around that. But the problem with the bandwidth, and especially the drain on the battery, it depends on which phone you have. Now, we don't have Android here anymore, thank goodness. But on the latest version of the iOS for the iPhone, it comes with a default setting where the native applications, the ones that come with the iPhone, are constantly refreshing their data and updates in the background, even though the app is not visibly running. And that can really drive up your usage and drain your battery very quickly. So you have to go into settings and go into that background refresh and turn it all off, and then your phone will act much more civilized.
Right. Yeah, I do that with no matter what operating system. I've used several, and they give you a limited amount of what you can disable. And I'm a long-time user of Linux distros for computers, for PCs, and it's pretty apparent that they don't give you the full range of capability. And I believe didn't Obama sign a bill or some kind of a directive that cell phone operators allow their phones to be modified or rooted, or is it just carrier unlocked? I'm not sure. Do you have any
Well,
any idea about that?
Basically, all of the electronic devices we have today, our routers, our cell phones, our tablets, and so forth, have government-mandated backdoors in them to allow the NSA to come on in and bypass our security and basically look at what we're doing. The problem is that all of the cyber criminals have located those same backdoors, and they're using them as vectors to plant malware, ransomware, so forth and so on. And it's been made worse by the fact that due to some very sloppy security over at the NSA, some of their most powerful cyber weapons tools have now made it onto the dark web. And they were trying to blame Kaspersky for it, but it turned out it was actually just one of the NSA's own workers who broke the rules and took copies of this stuff home and put it on his home computer, and then he used a password cracker to install an illegal copy of Microsoft Office, and at that point his machine was opened up for outside hackers who found this NSA stuff on his machine, stole it, put it on the dark web. And apparently there was a similar leak of the CIA's cyber weapons tools as well. So a lot of the problems that we're dealing with in terms of cyber crime are courtesy of the United States government.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty plausible. That's a little more maybe believable and complex. I just thought it was maybe the NSA guy on one side of the hallway passing it over to the dark web guy on the other side of the hallway who passes it on.
That may have happened too. That may have happened too. I mean, you know, the dark web, there's a lot of organized crime there. They've got the money if they can bribe somebody. But in this case, this NSA guy, he was just being careless. He was being arrogant. And they tried to blame Kaspersky for it. Ooh, bad Kaspersky, it's the Russians did it. No, the NSA did it to themselves, and they're just looking for somebody to blame.
Yeah. I just wonder when the NSA and the CIA is going to penetrate site intelligence and read a cat and follow the trail.
Oh, they don't need to. They're all working hand in hand. My question is, why hasn't the NSA come up with copies of all of Hillary Clinton's emails? Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm already getting emails from Android fans saying, you don't know what you're talking about. Android is much better than iOS. Well, Claire's last cell phone was an Android. We had an Android tablet, and what we want is, yes, we're older. We don't want to have to spend a lot of time playing with the gizmo. We want the gizmo to do what we want it to do. Make calls, do email, web browsing, that's it. I don't want to spend time tinkering with it to customize it and make it, you know, all the things you can change on Android. I don't want to change anything. I want the thing out of the box to do work for me, not the other way around. Getting on back to politics, the U.S. Has now imposed new sanctions on Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the sanctions were passed by voice vote without opposition on the pretext of Hezbollah's acts of death and destruction. Actually, the reason is because Israel does not like Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is standing in the way of Israel's re-invasion of Lebanon. They still want that Litani River. They still want Eretz Israel. Now, over in Ukraine, they've had a poll, and apparently 79% of the Ukrainians do not support Poroshenko. They do not like him. And so his domestic support just isn't there. He's installed as a puppet ruler to get Ukraine into the European Union, and now the EU is backing off because after all these years of war with the eastern Ukrainian republics and the loss of Crimea, it's now a raw deal. The EU doesn't need another basket case nation to sign on. They need a nation that's got wealth that can be siphoned off to keep the EU going a little bit longer. Now, there's a very interesting article that came out of Sputnik News, how Washington gave Iraqi Kurds up to Baghdad and lost to Iran. And the Kurds are feeling very, very betrayed by the U.S. because originally the U.S. was saying, oh, yeah, we think it'd be a really, really good idea. Then when they had the referendum and Baghdad started pushing back the other way, and the U.S. said, well, maybe it wasn't such a really, really good idea. But basically all of these U.S. interventions, they're all stumbling badly. They're all in serious, serious trouble. Now, the former IDF general, Shlomo Bram of the Israeli Institute for National Security Studies, says that the Kurds made a big miscalculation with their independence bid, and this offer to abandon independence in exchange for talks is an attempt to repair the damage between them and Baghdad. So that whole situation has fallen apart. Now, the original goal of the independent Kurdistan was to carve up not just sections of Iraq, but sections of Syria into the new Kurdistan with hopefully a pro-U.S., pro-Israel Kurdish government, which would give the U.S. and Israel access to all that oil. That has now fizzled out here, which is why Israel is all of a sudden making more moves to cement their hold on the Golan. All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And interestingly enough, the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid al-Khamenei, in a meeting with visiting Iraq Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi on Thursday, basically gave him a good piece of advice. Never trust the U.S. government. They don't keep their promises. Good advice. Very good advice. Although by this point, I'm pretty sure al-Abadi already figured that out for himself. But that's the image and reputation of the U.S. government around the world. They don't keep their commitments. They don't keep to the treaties. Didn't keep to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty relative to Iran. Didn't keep with the P5+1 deal, pulling out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The U.S. government's signature on that piece of paper is a waste of ink. Now, apparently, as events start to ratchet up against Iran, somebody's playing the same old game again. We're going to send in terrorists. There's going to be terrorists on the ground, and then we'll just have to intervene for those poor people of Iran to save them from the evil terrorists. Well, so far, not working out very well. The IRGC basically found a terrorist team that infiltrated into the Chaldoran region in the northwestern province of West Azerbaijan. Apparently these terrorists killed 2 local residents. The ground forces launched an operation after the attack, chasing the terrorists and killing all 4 of them in an armed clash. They seized weapons, communication equipment, and ammunition from the terrorists. And apparently Iran is basically enhancing their counter-terror operations because they've seen the same pattern. Same thing the U.S. did in Syria. Send in ISIS and al-Qaeda and then say, oh, look, there's ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria. War on terror. We must invade. Now, we're starting to get some more belligerent talk from Israel, and specifically Intelligence Minister Israel Katz came on out and said that if Trump fails to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions, Israel will strike. Now, to put that in a little bit of context, you need to remember a couple of things. Iran's nuclear ambitions were power stations. That's what they were building. That's what they were allowed to build under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And by the way, under that treaty, the U.S. was obligated to go on into Iran and help them build the power station. Pour the foundations, run the wiring, do the piping, which is a great way of making sure there isn't a bomb factory in the basement like Israel has underneath Dimona. You also need to remember that Israel said exactly the same thing about Iraq. Iraq had nuclear ambitions. They were going to build nuclear bombs. It was going to be a threat to the world. And Israel went and bombed Iraq's power station at Osirak. And then, of course, there was the Iraq War. Everybody went on in. There were no nuclear weapons. No weapons of mass destruction. Experts examining the ruins of the Osirak power station found a power station and nothing else. So Israel is not really reliable at pointing the finger at other countries and saying, oh, they're building a bomb, we have to go attack them. But it looks like Israel might. Israel will bomb Iran, and then Iran will counterattack, and Israel will turn to the U.S. and say, oh, help, help, the evil Iranians are attacking us. Okay. Now, apparently over in Pakistan, the court has ordered the arrest of the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who's embroiled in 2 corruption cases tied to the Panama Papers leak. Well, good. We do need to. We need some of that here. We need some more prosecutions for corruption. And I know they got that former head of the FDA, but I think we have to aim high on that particular situation. U.S. House passed the harshest ever North Korean sanctions. This was a 415-2 vote. The House of Representatives has passed the Otto Warmbier Act, a new round of sanctions against North Korea described as the harshest ever in U.S. history. If it passes the Senate and it's signed by Trump, and it probably will be, it would ban anyone who does any business or cooperates in any way with North Korea from having U.S. business ties. It's not just North Korean businesses, it's anybody doing business with North Korea. That's going to anger a lot of people. That's going to harm a lot of economies like China, South Korea. North Korea right now is doing a huge amount of business over in construction in other parts of the world. This is going to further isolate us. This is like all these other sanctions and everything that the U.S. has done. It's going to cause more harm and isolation for American companies than it will for North Korea. All right, let's first of all do a shout-out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and let's take a telephone call from Scott in Norfolk. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was just reading in the Wall Street Journal today about the wall that Trump is looking at building, and there are samples from each company that is putting a bid in.
Yes.
To be the one to build the wall. And I thought, and they were all American companies, which I liked. But I thought, wouldn't that be interesting if we were to hire an Israeli company to build that wall?
I think one of the companies that tried to put a bid in was the company that builds those walls over in Israel.
How would the media? I mean, they would have to turn themselves into a pretzel to explain that, to be against the wall but pro-Israel at the same time.
Oh, well, that's been the hypocrisy all along. Israel's wall against the Palestinians is good, and our wall against illegal immigrants, that's bad. And again, I don't really know that a wall is anything more than a symbolic measure, because it's not going to be across the entire Mexican border. People will just go around it, or they'll dig under it, or they'll crawl over it. And the fact of the matter is the walls have been tremendously ineffective in terms of stopping the flood of illegal immigrants. What we need to do is enforce the existing immigration laws in this country right now under Title VIII, which means if you give aid and shelter to an illegal immigrant, if you house them, if you give them a job, if you give them transportation, you're looking at jail time. Now remember, when Eisenhower was president, he launched Operation Wetback, and he just absolutely brought to an end the illegal immigration problem with only 1/10 of the manpower that ICE has today. So if Eisenhower can do it, we can do it. The problem is that we have a political system that's wholly on board with this globalism and open borders idea, despite the damage it's causing to everybody. And I don't really think the wall is going to be all that effective. If you want to be effective, put crocodiles in the Rio Grande.
Well, I tell you one thing that really showed that 9/11 was a false flag was the fact that no one was talking about building a wall then.
Yes.
There were no borders being discussed on either the south or north side of the country, and that was that's a huge tell that 9/11 was not what we've been told it was.
I'm not sure that that's a strong link on that, but again, back when 9/11 happened, the existing immigration laws were being enforced. People were being arrested and sent back, not hurried off and buried in the interior of the country where they can't be easily found. That all came on long after 9/11. But again, as with Europe, this is all part of trying to erase our sense of local culture, local history, local identity, and merge all of humanity into this one mass of easily controllable people.
Well, on a different subject and just a quick question, can you please explain to me Bitcoin and how the heck they come up with that idea? There's something about using your computer to mine. What is that about? What is that?
You mean
how does that work?
On the Bitcoin? Well, basically it's a computer program that you put on your computer, and it does a lot of processing, and when the processing is over, you get a Bitcoin. My speculation, and I didn't dig in enough to find it, but I think the original Bitcoin miner was actually a public key cracker, or the private key cracker, for this public key versus private key encryption, the Whitfield-Diffie system. Because the idea is basically that you can't get back to the private key from the public key. That's not entirely accurate. You can if you have enough compute power. And for a while, I was wondering whether all this Bitcoin mining was actually some way of crowdsourcing the issue of cracking these private keys from the public keys.
What do you think about it now?
I'm not really paying that much attention to it, but again, there's a question there. Exactly what is being done with all that computer power? I can't imagine that they're just, figuring out pi to the 11 millionth place or something like that. Somebody somewhere's got a purpose for all this encryption. I mean, I do know that there are large blocks of data being moved in and out of your computer while the Bitcoin mining is working.
Well, what amazes me is they'll talk about Bitcoin and things like the Wall Street Journal, and they mention mining as if it's self-explanatory. And I'm like, I can understand more about central banks of different countries working together behind a fiat currency than I can just throwing this idea of mining using computer processing power to build value to Bitcoin. That seems more strange than the current system we have now. And it's just amazing that people will just take it at face value. Oh, mining. That's how you get value, and they don't know what it is.
No, they really don't.
And I still don't understand.
Well, I remember when Bitcoin first came along, and I had a very good friend who had a computer business at that time, and he'd set up a machine to do nothing but mining Bitcoins, and he was proud on how he had $32 worth of Bitcoins. And I said, how much did you spend on that machine? How much electricity is it using? And obviously a lot more real value, real money was being spent running this computer than you were getting in the resulting Bitcoins. But again, I was very suspicious of that Bitcoin mining process because everybody was being encouraged to do it, and it looked to me like it was a crowdsourced public key cracker.
And possibly a money laundering deal.
Don't know how that would work. There's no place to put cash into it in the mining operation. You spend the cash to build your computer, but that's basically it. Anyway, listen, Scott, we're going to let you go here, take some more phone calls. We're going to switch over here to Alex in Florida. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I think that, I hope, well, I don't hope, but I think that Hillary Clinton may be having to fall on her sword for the deep state. I think they could be at the point where they're like, you know what, I look back to the book 1984, where the lead character in that book went to the government and said, I want to work for you guys. And they basically said, you can, but we may want to disfigure you one day. You may have to die for us one day. It's a very, they told him. And basically, I think that Hillary Clinton could be at that point where she was willing to sign her soul to them, and now they're saying it's your turn to fall because we can't all fall with you. And Obama could be involved, could be falling on his sword too. There could be a lot of them falling on their sword right now. I hope that's the case, but I also hope that that's not the case because that means that we would still have the same system, just some new puppets on the stage. What do you think about that thought?
Well, first of all, Hillary is not the type to fall on her sword or sacrifice herself for the greater good or the deep state or anything. If anything, if this really starts to come apart and they can't contain it, I'm expecting a bug out. I'm expecting Hillary and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Huma Abedin and all of these other players at the law firms and Podesta and all of them to basically head for the airport at the same time and leave the country for a place without extradition and just leave the mess behind them. These are not people who ever think of others above their own personal interests. So that's never going to happen. But again, they're trying to put a lid on this thing. They're trying to avoid prosecution. Unfortunately, it's at such a scale where the American people are looking at it and saying, yeah, there is something wrong with the entire government that these people are getting away with this stuff. And to have the Attorney General and the head of the FBI, 2 in a row, trying to protect this situation. Yeah, I mean, as I said before, the credibility and legitimacy of the U.S. government and of the corporate media is on the line right now. If they keep on trying to keep a lid on this and saying there's nothing here, let's go back to Trump and Russia, they're going to collapse. People are fed up with all of this nonsense now.
That's right. Well, that's what I was thinking, is that maybe instead of them collapsing, it would be a collapse of the puppets. Hillary Clinton and maybe Obama and Comey and Loretta Lynch and all the ones that were basically involved, which would be unfortunate if the system survived that. But anyway, I wanted to ask you a question on 9/11. The gentleman just before me was talking about he knew 9/11 was an inside job when such and such happened. I watched a documentary about 15 years ago on 9/11 where they showed that our government knew the whereabouts of all the terrorists, where they lived, what they did, when they moved, what courses they were taking for the aviation, everything. That documentary is nowhere to be found. Today, anyone that watched that documentary, they would know that our government was heavily involved in 9/11. Plus, our government, in basically 1 hour, told us everybody that did it.
Yeah, I mean
that's enough evidence right now.
I mean, the buildings hadn't even finished collapsing, and the corporate media was out there saying, "Oh yes, it's Osama bin Laden." And the funny thing about that is the whole month before, the media had been just, pushing Osama bin Laden's image. And I remember I was still friendly with the Free Republic people, and I posted an article saying, this isn't news reporting, it's a sales pitch. They're selling this image of Osama bin Laden as somebody we all need to be afraid of. They're marketing him. And I got quite a few negative comments back on that. And I said, no, there's something big that's about to happen, and they're going to blame this Osama bin Laden guy for it. So when 9/11 happened, and I looked at it, it was pretty obvious what was going on. As far as those original hijackers are concerned, you need to remember it is arguable they were not even on those flights. Their names don't show up in the passenger manifests, and most of them turned up to be quite alive after 9/11 was over. In fact, one of the named hijackers turned out to be a pilot for the Saudi airline, and he sued for defamation, and he won. And, of course, the American corporate media really didn't report on that too much.
That's right. And another thing, not one of the black boxes from any of the planes has ever been found, supposedly. I mean, that right, we would know for certain. And I did a little bit of research. Let's say that those planes were filled up, or 3/4 of the way filled, and half the passengers were males. What that would mean is that for each hijacker, he would have to beat up 3 males with his box cutter. It would be almost 3 or 4 on one, and that wouldn't hurting. I might lose a hand, but I will do anything I can do to twist that guy's head off. You would do the same, would you? Or would you sit back and say, "We're just going to fly into the building"?
I would probably take some kind of. I'd probably take some kind of action. And I'm in agreement with you on that one. But again, we've all been told what happened on the airplanes. We don't know that it's real. We don't know if there really were hijackers on board the plane or if the planes had been put under remote control and flown into those buildings. In fact, I'm of the opinion that Flight 93 was under remote control, and the crew got back control of the plane, and that's why it had to be shot down. Anyway, Alex, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently Hillary Clinton has come on out saying that she had no idea her campaign was paying for this Russia-Trump dossier. She only just learned about it in the corporate media, which was an excuse we kept hearing from Barack Obama when his scandal started coming on out. I only found out about it today, really. It turned out to be a complete lie. And it's a lie again. That's what they're all trying to bail and get away from this thing. But it isn't. It's going to stick. You know, because ultimately people are going to say, they're not going to believe that Hillary didn't know about it. At the very least, they're going to say, she should have. It was her campaign. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Pat in Fort Worth, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you were talking about the wall between us and Mexico.
Yes.
I don't know how many people know or thought about it. It's one time it's 308 nationalities coming over that wall. Even Cubans, I hear, are coming over whenever Obama was going to neutralize, get relations with them, you know. And they just didn't want to go to the normal way to get over here, so they're going to run over. They say thousands have been running over the Mexican border. Okay.
Yes.
And then I really think we should have a wall. And you say there's nothing you can do to keep them from coming over. They swim around the one in California, I hear.
Yes.
But I believe that we will get in war. I can't tell you when. And that will be the really thing that tells us which one is really an American thinking person and who just doesn't want citizenship because they want to run when things get tough. Back to Mexico. And I've always said, well, if they make a wall, they should put an adjustable thing on the top where they can't get over the wall so easy. You know, the barbed wire fence, and turn it to hold them in. Because if the war starts and they want to run to Mexico, they can't go. Because they've been drawing on all their benefits, and they need to help pay for it, just like our relatives have paid for it, and we've suffered for them to have this freedom.
Yeah, but the problem with that idea is they're not going to be inspired fighters. You know, they may go along and take the uniform and go through the basic training, and they get into combat, they're just going to cower, you know, behind a log because it's not really their country. They don't have an emotional connection to the United States. And so I've heard all these plans about using the refugees and the illegal immigrants, promise them citizenship if they fight in our military forces. They're not going to be dedicated, enthusiastic fighters. They're going to do the very minimum they need to get through and get that little green card or that citizenship certificate, and that's about it. It's not going to be an effective fighting force.
You don't think, you think it would be legal for us to say that since Mexico is our border, and we're going to have to live with it, like it or not, that we should all learn Spanish, and having our kids at school learn Spanish, and they will know English, and we will have decent trading partners if they ever get normal. And not thinking that when they come to America, they just scoop up money on the ground. That's what they're being told on there.
Yeah, they are. But I'm sorry. You know, if you're going to come to America, learn the local language, and that's English. And when I worked in other countries around the world, when I was still working in film, I made the effort of learning the local language. Now, fortunately, everywhere I went, there were people who spoke excellent English, but they respected the fact that I was trying to learn their language. Because it wasn't like I was moving there. I was only there for a few weeks or a few months. You know, but I did make the effort of learning the language in order to get around here. That's just the respectful thing to do.
And they do here. The Mexicans appreciate the fact that you learn Spanish. In fact, it scares them a little sometimes because they think they're talking behind your back and you understand them.
Yeah, a couple of times when I've been on vacation in Puerto Vallarta or Los Hadas, I've had that happen. I even had it happen once with some Japanese who were visiting our film company in Los Angeles, and they were saying some frankly uncomplimentary things, and one of them noticed that I gave a start and seems wakara desu ka? Do you understand what I'm saying? And I went, hi, wakarimasu, and at that point they all kind of shut up. All right, Pat, we got to let you go, and we'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right back to the telephones here. Mike in Kentucky, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, wow. You're talking about 9/11. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
Okay. I just stumbled across some of this stuff to do with the flight data recorders. I was wondering, I know you've got sections on your webpage to do with a lot of this. Do you have some of the material or some of the flight data recorder data from pilots for 9/11 Truth that shows those models of planes were not supposed to have GPS-enabled flight correction, and the data fields show flight data GPS-enabled? Those models were not... The civilian planes should not have had GPS. And from 1991, it was still military classified, and the flight data recorders show that field lit as enabled. So there's two of the planes, the one that hit the Pentagon, the one that hit the South Tower, that should not have had GPS, but according to 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth have show that. I just recently found a video of theirs called The Speed of Lies, and there's a couple of them that talk about that. They're documentaries. I just wondered if you'd acquired those that data.
I may have. Again, it was so long ago.
Okay.
I may have that data. I know I've got a huge amount of data about 9/11 on my server. It's not even linked to the page yet, and I keep saying one of these days I'll have enough time to go back and look through all of this. But then you have architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Richard Gage is just doing a fabulous job. But again, one of the things people need to keep in mind is the comptroller of the Pentagon when all of this went down was a guy named Dov Zakheim. And before he'd been appointed by President Bush to be the comptroller of the Pentagon, he ran a company that built remote control systems for commercial jets so that they could
do multiple jets at the same time. They could do multiple jets at the same time.
Yeah, well, the idea was...
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
the photographic evidence shows that those planes were going way faster than a civilian version could go, like maybe up to 600 miles an hour. Now, they top out at 380 or something. The barber pole on their flight speed gauge is like 380. So there's no way that, especially the plane that hit the South Tower, was way faster than possible for a civilian plane.
Well, I disagree with pilots for 9/11 Truth on that one. Because my analysis doesn't match up with that. These aircraft basically are designed to fly up to just before the speed of sound. And, of course, the speed of sound varies with altitude. But the aircraft that were there over Manhattan appeared to be flying at about 300 knots. When they crashed into the buildings there. Anyway, listen, Mike, we're going to let you go. I got a lot of news to cover. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Have a good day. All right. All right. Bear with all the pauses here from my coughing. I'm a touch under the weather here. Now, getting on back to the war zones. The United States and North Korea are edging into increasingly dangerous territory. This is an article out of thenation.com. And basically, the conflict is going to be front and center when Trump pays his first state visits to Japan and South Korea next month. And in Japan, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe just won a smashing re-election victory. And Trump will be honored with an audience with the country's aging emperor and his usual golf game with Abe. Now, Abe's agenda is to pull Japan out of its post-war pacifism and once again reassert Japan as a regional military power, and North Korea might be his first opportunity to do that. there have been several recent changes to the Japanese constitution that allow for expanding the military forces. Prior to that, the constitution of Japan had, after the end of World War II, they were very limited in the military they were allowed to have for obvious reasons. And now Japan wants to move away from that. Now, of growing concern for a lot of people, and this came out of womensystems.com, is the concern that this conflict with North Korea could turn into a nuclear conflict very, very quickly, very easily. And they're saying basically North Korea by 2020, North Korea will either be a post-atomic wasteland, an active war zone, or a de facto nuclear-armed state with a fully developed intercontinental ballistic missile capability. Now, I put a question mark over that one because about a month ago, we did a story about some of the disastrous mistakes made by the Central Intelligence Agency over the years, including the timing of Russia's first nuclear weapon, the fall of the Soviet Union itself. And so at this point, I would imagine that probably North Korea is moving along as quickly as they can and are probably going to have a nuclear deterrent before too much longer. And I'm not expecting North Korea to just haul off and attack anybody because that would be national suicide. The whole point of having nuclear weapons and ICBMs is to deter other nations from invading you. And if you will notice, in all these wars fought by the United States over the last 16 years, the U.S. is always going after countries that do not have a deterrent. It only whoops on these countries that are relatively helpless. And now apparently we're now in 53 of 54 nations in Africa. None of them had nuclear weapons either. Let's take a phone call here. Victor in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. Hi, Mike. I'm a both speaking language. I speak Russian. I speak English, and I subscribe to at least maybe 10 policymakers in Russia, including Zhirinovsky. And I've been watching this escalation of blaming Russians for everything. Meanwhile, Clintons were in collude with the Russians to buy the uranium from. She was selling a country like in a candy store with all its secrets, with all its all the people's money that's invested in research and development. They were just selling it out for pennies on a dollar to anybody who can. I watched this act from the beginning.
Yes.
And it seems like the Russians. There's a lot of English-speaking people with these websites today that following your website. They following the websites of Alex Jones, and they watching how we're getting attacked by the globalism across the board. And that concerns both countries and both its peoples. They really they are concerned that this there's a takeover worldwide. This technocracy and the leadership with people like George Soros trying to overtake the countries and starting revolutions. I'm waiting for a revolution to start immediately in Russia and United States. I hope it gets deterred.
Well, the one in Russia has been put off because Putin very wisely has banned all of the Soros-linked non-governmental organizations that were operating in his country, and even some not linked to Soros, like U.S. aid, which has been tangled up with a lot of these destabilization operations in other countries, where they go on in and say, we're here to help, and what they do is they fund the opposition, they stir up trouble, leading to, an overthrow of the government. So Putin is already well aware of how this game is played, and he's taking steps to prevent it. So I'm not expecting there's going to be a revolution in Russia. What we may see during the next election is an attempt to defraud Putin of re-election and put in somebody who's more friendly to the West.
What about the $18 billion that Soros just transferred over to be used across the globe for these color purple revolutions, Mike?
Yeah, that's very, very concerning. That sudden transfer of money means something big is on the horizon. There's going to be a big, gigantic push for this globalist agenda. We don't know where it's coming from. Obviously Soros is realizing that his dream of a one world government is slipping away from him, and so he's ready to give it one more push.
I just watched the guy that had big oil companies in Russia on national TV and websites promoting that they're going to overturn and create another revolution. I don't know, I forgot the name of the guy. But he was a big oil man and got stripped of all his companies. I think he even went to jail. I just saw him maybe 10 days ago speaking how there's a large amount of money. He said, this is his own words, that the West and Russia will be on fire this fall.
Well, that's a very alarming thing to hear, and we certainly know that Antifa is talking about trying to start a civil war on November 8th, which is the anniversary of Trump's election victory. At this point, it's being treated like they're just going to stand around and scream at the sky. But again, it's of concern that apparently FEMA is holding a nationwide drill simulating the collapse of the power grid. So everybody needs to be sort of prepared for the worst possible outcome on the 8th.
I agree with you, Mike. I'm watching this 100 years of October Revolution, and I'm just watching from each day to day they're going to find an event to ignite something bigger.
Well, my understanding right now is that for the most part, the people living in the Russian republics are fairly content. There isn't that boiling resentment that you had in Tsarist Russia on which to build a revolution. So again, Putin is wisely and prudently keeping these destabilization operations out of his country.
It's true, Mike. I agree with you on that. It looks like he have a pretty good grasp on what's going on, although there are people coming out, including from the military ranks, that's saying absurd things, that he ruined the country and all that. But I'm watching the military getting developed behind the scenes. What they're developing a 57-millimeter semi-automatic gun that shoots at 100 rounds a minute, that have a 12-kilometer range with 5 different ammunition capacities. I mean, that's incredible. If it's going tanks against tanks that's been put in outside of Europe now, I believe in Sweden caves or Switzerland, the borders, Obama ordered a bunch of tanks in there. I'm telling you, the 57-millimeter on 3 different platforms will destroy those things like fish in a barrel.
Well, apparently somebody leaked a document from NATO where NATO is actually in agreement with you that a conventional force-on-force conflict along the Russian border in Europe, NATO's not going to be able to prevail. And that may be the reason they kind of backed off on all of this threatening gesture. Anyway, listen, Victor, thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Have yourself a really good day. We're going to let you go here and get back to the news. Okay. Now then, let's see. Long time ago, this is a case of something just dragging on forever and ever. The second Secretary General of the United Nations was a gentleman named Dag Hammarskjöld, and he was apparently killed in a plane crash while he was on his way to deal with a negotiation. And it was I think this was like back in the 60s. Apparently, the UN has been investigating all these years, and they issued a report saying that basically some kind of an external attack brought Dag Hammarskjöld's plane down, and that the aircraft was witnessed to be on fire before it crashed, and that the aircraft apparently was fired on by or otherwise actively engaged by another aircraft. So a little bit of wet work even all the way back then. Let's talk about the economic news here. Venezuela is joining the anti-dollar crusade. They will no longer accept oil export payments in dollars. For now, Venezuela is doing all of its oil business in euros, but there's a strong argument that China's new gold-backed petro-yuan will become a permanent replacement. And as the petrodollar dies, the dollar itself will fall alongside it, because it's that petrodollar deal is the only thing propping up demand for the U.S. dollar internationally. Now, we've been hearing all these articles about how terrible things are in Russia and how terrible the economy is in China, and it's really horrible, and you should be glad you're living here in the United States of America. But according to this article out of Investment Watch blog, the reality is that the U.S. is in far worse economic shape than either China or Russia. And like everything else to do with the economy, you're not being told. They're rigging the stock market up, and I want to see what it's doing here right now. It actually had a pretty lousy day yesterday. So let's see how it ended up today. Well, a little bit better today, not spectacularly so. Yesterday it had a real big downturn. So they're rigging the stock market. They're lying about the unemployment numbers. They're lying about the rate of inflation. And they're trying to just create this illusion that the economy is okay, that we're in a recovery, and you shouldn't be upset with either Wall Street or Washington, D.C. over how things are going, because if you're hungry and homeless and out of work, it has to be your fault. But that's not the reality. Practically all of the 10 million jobs created in the U.S. since 2005 were temporary jobs. And that's another way they rig the unemployment numbers, because the company will hire a temp worker. Oh, we've created a job. Then the temp worker is let go. And then a few weeks down the line, that same company hires another temp worker. Oh, that's another job that was been created. But in terms of permanent career path jobs, they're just not out there. Now, we had somebody call into the show the other day talking about real estate prices in San Francisco and how it was obviously another bubble. And now it looks like the bubble may be in trouble because pending home sales have plunged in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they're dropping all across California. So all of a sudden, the frothing is over. The land flipping seems to be over, at least for the moment, and that is a harbinger of a downturn yet to come. Getting on over in Europe, Brussels, apparently in response to the Catalonia referendum and the ongoing debate over Brexit, is trying to consolidate its control over the rest of the European member states. And the EU Commission has come up with this plan where they're going to strip the member state governments of veto power. In other words, what the EU Commission says, that will be the law of the land. Nobody's allowed to refuse. That's not what these people signed up for. They signed up for free travel, free trade, and that was it. So we're going to take another break here for some commercials. When we come on back, a couple of developments about Harvey Weinstein and more news. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to give a little bit of attention to Harvey Weinstein and what's going on with him, not to the detriment of our focus on Uranium Gate and P-Gate and all of this other stuff that the epic of Clinton's mess, as it were. Apparently, actress Natasha Malthe has come on out and accused Harvey Weinstein of rape, apparently back in 2008, and followed by a pattern of harassing her while she pursued her acting career, and this is the latest woman to accuse Weinstein of sexual assault. Now, apparently, Weinstein's company also has a publishing arm, Miramax Books, and apparently this author had written a book which was a thinly disguised telling of some of what Weinstein and his company were doing. They changed the names. You know, it was a dramatization, fictionalization, and apparently Weinstein decided that the best way to keep that book from really getting on out there was to be the publisher. So he basically approached the writer and said, I love it, I understand it's, it's like Citizen Kane, it's a thinly veiled story about William Randolph Hearst, and this is the same thing here, but we're going to publish it. And he acquired the rights and then set about undermining his own publishing company's property. They sold foreign rights in 9 countries. The manuscript was never released in England. And so that's how that stuff gets done when you have way too much money here. Now, apparently, Oscar-winning writer-director Paul Haggis taking his career in hand, has now come forward to suggest that Hollywood is still covering up credible and serious allegations of pedophilia. And again, Corey Feldman is now out there. He's mounting a campaign where he's going to have a lot of these victims of this pedophilia go public and start naming names, which is probably why they ginned up an arrest for marijuana to try and discredit him. From the world of political correctness, apparently over at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, somebody defaced the statue of Theodore Roosevelt. They basically sprayed red paint all over the base of the statue, and it's basically vandalism of statues deemed offensive by certain groups. Well, here's the problem. Every statue out there is going to be offensive to somebody, and we can't have the entire world held hostage to people who are offended by things, because there is a huge population of people whose entire sense of self-valuation is always finding something to be offended about. Oh, I'm offended by this, I'm offended by that, I'm offended by that. Well, go ahead, be offended. I don't care. But you don't have a right to come on in and deface statues of America's presidents just because you find them offensive. If you find it offensive, shut your eyes. Turn away. That's the correct, mature way to do it. Not try and deface it so that nobody else can see it, because that has nothing to do with your being offended. It has everything to do with your deciding what you want other people to see or not see. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, we were talking about computers and malware. Kaspersky has been given the blame, as it were, for the leaking of NSA's cyber weapons onto the dark web. And what really happened was that this NSA worker broke company rules and took copies of this software home with him, put it on his PC. Then he used a password cracker to install a bootleg copy of Windows Office. And at that point, his machine was compromised and open for hackers to come on in and look around, and they found the cyber weapons, and that was the vector by which it got on to the dark web. Now, the U.S. is out there saying it's all Kaspersky's, because Kaspersky was copying off this malware from the computer and sending it back to Russia, and they were stealing it. Well, if you really think about how antivirus systems work, that's what they're supposed to do. Kaspersky detected this was malware. It was computer malware. Didn't matter where it came from. It was computer malware. And all of these antivirus companies, when they encounter something that is malware that is not already in their database, they send a copy back home for analysis. In other words, the Kaspersky software was doing what it's supposed to do. But the reason that information got leaked out goes back to this NSA worker who just got sloppy. And considering the potential damage these weapons, these cyber weapons can cause, they should have been as under tight control as nuclear weapons or chemical weapons. Instead, NSA and CIA are just blithely walking around with flash drives full of these potentially very destructive pieces of software. Maybe that's one of the reasons why the government doesn't seem to want to deal with cybercrime and ransomware, because any detailed investigation is inevitably going to lead back to CIA and NSA's sloppy handling of the software. Another story here. Google, Facebook, and Comcast jointly lied to California lawmakers to scuttle the broadband privacy bill. Now, earlier this year, the GOP and the Trump administration rushed to kill consumer broadband privacy rules. And while the broadband industry made a big fuss when the rules were originally proposed, they were actually relatively modest, simply requiring that ISPs clearly disclose what they're selling, who they're selling it to, and provide working opt-out tools, which sounds very, very reasonable. But the online industry didn't like that. They want to be able to take the information they grab from you and just sell it to marketers or whoever else wants it. And a lot of these companies basically didn't want to do this, and these rules were imposed because the ISPs repeatedly showed they were incapable of self-regulation. There was Verizon's zombie cookie problem, AT&T's attempts to charge you more if you wanted privacy. They literally had that. Yes, we'll have your thing private, but you got to pay us extra for it. And Cable One wanted to use credit scores to provide even worse customer support. So it really is like the entire human population of this country is just there to be harvested from. Now, here's another good example of somebody being very, very sloppy. Apparently, the recovery software on Dell PCs goes to a specific web address, a Dell web address. And apparently, a contractor who's supposed to be maintaining all of this failed to renew the domain registration. And it went wild, and this web address was taken over by a third party. And unfortunately, because Dell computers check in with that domain periodically, whoever snapped it up could use it to distribute malware. Now, security expert and author Brian Krebs thinks this has already happened. Dell, on the other hand, is saying absolutely not, no malware has been transferred. How would they really know? They're not in control of that domain anymore. They're not in control of the server the domain points to. Article coming out of the Register in Great Britain talking about some of these LG SmartThingQ home devices. It turns out they're all pretty much hackable prior to a recent security update. And they're saying, get the security update here. But apparently these appliances can be used to find out things going on in your home. In fact, their robot vacuum cleaner can literally draw a map of the inside of your home and send it to somebody outside who may be casing the place or just wants to know which windows he should be peeking through. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And again, I don't feel a real strong need to have intelligent anything outside of this office. It's another classic case of a product that gets rushed into the stores without people actually thinking all the way through. What's going to happen when this is in my home? So, now, apparently the Interstate Voter Registration Cross-Check Program has been found to have serious major security flaws. And apparently the system has been using email to send state election officials usernames, passwords, and decryption codes for databases containing records of all voters in about 30 states. And it was wide open to hacking. Now, here's an interesting little story. Down in Georgia, I think I may have mentioned this briefly yesterday, but we're going to mention it again today. There was a computer server crucial to a lawsuit against Georgia election officials, and apparently it was wiped clean by its custodians after the suit was filed. The server's data was destroyed July 7th by technicians at the Center for Election Systems at Kennesaw State University, which runs the state's election system. The data wipe was revealed in an email sent last week from an assistant state attorney general to plaintiffs in the case. Now, the lawsuit was filed by a diverse group of election reform advocates to try and force Georgia to retire its antiquated and heavily criticized election technology. The server in question, which served as a statewide staging location for key election-related data, made national headlines in June after a security expert disclosed a gaping security hole that wasn't fixed 6 months after he reported it to election authorities. In other words, it wasn't a gaping hole, it was a back door. And obviously, the fact that they decided to just wipe the server, even though it was critical to a lawsuit, that right there tells you something's going on. They got something to hide here. This is a very, very bizarre story here, and it's coming hard on the heels of efforts to criminalize any kind of environmental or health activism. We know that there are efforts now to prosecute people who take photos or videos of what goes on in factory farms, because it's very abusive of the animals. And the latest one here now has to do with environmental activists who are trying to influence where pipelines are going. So several members of Congress have signed on to a letter recommending Attorney General Jeff Sessions look into whether the Justice Department has the laws it needs to prosecute environmental activists challenging pipelines as if they are terrorists. That's it now. Stand up to an oil company, you're a terrorist. Isn't it weird how over the years the definition of terrorist has changed? So the letter is asking Sessions if the USA Patriot Act and the Pipeline Safety Act contain enough provisions to criminalize actions against energy infrastructure at the federal level. It also asks if the Justice Department plans to prosecute any of the individuals involved in the alleged attempted sabotage of 4 major crude oil pipelines in multiple states on October 11th, 2016. I'm not sure if there was attempted sabotage. Those pipelines are built so poorly, they keep cracking all on their own. So that's it. If you stand up to an oil company, you're going to be a terrorist. What are they going to define as terrorism next? Overdue library books? It really is getting ridiculous. Now, one of the reasons they may be taking a tough stand against any kind of environmental or health activists is because the quality of life issues in this country are really starting to become noticeable. And there's this article out of Blacklisted News, and they're talking about this Clean Label Project study of 530 baby products. And what it found was horrendous. 65% of baby food products in the United States, including 4 out of 5 baby formulas, contain traces of arsenic. And officials say there is little they can do to remove these substances that could harm developing infants. They also found 36% of the products contained lead, 58% contained cadmium, 10% acrylamide, and while most samples contained only trace amounts of the toxins, some exceeded the U.S. Food and Drug Administration recommendations by up to 6 times. And the Transparency Labeling Group said that Gerber, Infamil, Plum Organics, and Sprout, leading market brands, produce some of the most contaminated baby foods. Jacqueline Brown, the executive director of the Clean Label Project, in an interview with USA Today said the baby industry needs to do a better job in protecting America's most vulnerable population. I would agree, but I have another suggestion. Forget about baby formulas. I mean, it's one of the weirdest things that the advertising industry ever succeeded in doing was convincing women that the milk produced by their own body for their own baby was somehow inferior to this concoction that came out of a laboratory. It's not true. And if you want to have baby food for your baby, just take your food, put it in a blender, and puree it. That's all they do to make baby food. It's just very finely ground up, somewhat diluted versions of adult food. And you're not going to, it almost boggles the mind. How are these elements like lead and arsenic and cadmium getting into baby food? And then they turn around and say, well, we can't get it on out of there. Well, how about stopping it from getting in the first place? Where is it coming from? It is utterly ridiculous that it's there in the first place. Now, we've been talking a lot about the bubonic plague problem over in Madagascar, and it's still spreading. But apparently there is another issue in that this pneumonic plague is spreading. It's not under control as everyone had hoped. In fact, it seems to be the opposite, and apparently warnings have now been issued to 9 other countries that this thing could go worldwide. Well, there's your depopulation agenda right there. The Black Death is coming. Now, here's an interesting little story. This is out of the Daily Mail. As you know, they're trying to resell the crisis of human-caused global warming. And because the world has very obviously not been warming, interest in this has really faded. So they're trying to ramp up the fear factor. And so this article out of Daily Mail is saying, oh, gee whiz, they made a huge mistake in temperature estimates of Earth's ancient oceans, and the numbers are now far more alarming. The oceans are warming much more quickly now than we had thought before. So now everybody has to get on board. Everybody has to work together. We've got to stop this warming problem. Well, let's send Al Gore down there to the bottom of the ocean with a hammer and a bunch of corks and start corking up all those undersea thermal vents and erupting volcanoes, because that's where the heat's coming from. But they're still trying to run this little scam. Get your money, get your obedience, get you to pay carbon taxes. I touched on this one briefly yesterday, where scientists have announced a plan to halt global warming by dimming the sun. They're going to build a giant pair of sunglasses for planet Earth. No, actually what they're talking about, they want to basically pour sulfate aerosols into the upper atmosphere to reflect some of the sun's rays back out into space. And they say this will cool the Earth down and counter the effects of climate change. Not really, because the climate's going to change anyway. You might cool the Earth down. That might make the next incoming mini ice age all that much worse. Plus, there's a large segment of the human population who will have an allergic reaction to these sulfate aerosols. They're not going to stay up in the upper atmosphere. They'll sinter on down. Rain will capture it, bring it down to the ground. It's a ridiculous idea. Now, apparently BBC has apologized for allowing Lord Lawson, who's a global warming skeptic, to make the claim on BBC that temperatures around the world have not risen over the last 10 years, and the data would back him up. Now, BBC is supposed to have dissenting voices in the pursuit of fairness. So Andrew Bridgen, Tory MP for North West Leicestershire, told the Mail Online, if the BBC had to apologize for every inaccuracy a Labour politician made on air, they would never be able to have a Labour politician on, which is political speak. But the reality is the data supports Lord Lawson. There's been no noticeable increase in global temperatures in 10 years. The carbon Nazis like to go on out and say, well, we had a record temperature over here and we had a record temperature over there, and they cherry pick the data. They use temperature measuring stations in the middle of airports, which are very hot places with all those jets belching out burning kerosene. We've got a photo of one of the official NOAA temperature measuring stations right next to a trash incinerator. Gee, I wonder what kind of numbers they're getting from that one. They were talking about how many temperatures over 100 we had this last summer in the United States. But it turned out to be far fewer days over 100 than 30 years ago. They're still trying to push this idea. And now they're pushing another one. Apparently, there is a new study that links conspiracy theorists with a mental disorder. Oh, those people are crazy. And that's actually an old trick the Soviet Union used. Anyone who questioned the official narrative, anyone who dissented, they're mentally ill. Don't listen to them. These people are crazy. You don't need to pay attention to them. It was an old Soviet trick. And it's the kind of thing that they do when they've run out of ideas. They can't win the debate. The jig is up. The cat is out of the bag. Yes, we were lied to about human-caused global warming. We were lied to about the safety of vaccines. We were lied to about the safety of GMOs. We were lied to about Saddam's nuclear weapons and Assad's sarin gas. Lie after lie after lie after lie. And now we're dealing with the lies of the real origins of the Russia-Trump dossier. We're dealing with the lies surrounding the Uranium One corruption. And all they can say is, oh, you people are all crazy for not believing us. It's a last desperate act to go on out and just start saying, oh, anybody who listens to the conspiracy theorists, they're all crazy, and you're crazy too for listening to them. You should not do that. Loyal, patriotic Americans will believe the official story. I don't think so. Okay, so coming up here on a commercial break. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Let's get some phone calls in here for the rest of the show. There's one there waiting right now, as a matter of fact, and we're going to come back to that phone call right after this commercial break, so stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go to the phones here, relative to those of you who wish to contribute and donate to Republic Broadcasting, I have a phone number for you and a mailing address, so get out those little pencils and pieces of paper, and we'll wait just a minute while you get that all sharpened up here. The phone number to call to make a donation is 800-724-2719, extension 3. The postal address, if you want to send in check, money order, box tops, whatever, is 2251 Double Creek Drive, and that's in Round Rock, Texas, 2 words, Round Rock, and the zip is 78664. So that's how you get in touch with us. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I got 2 items. The first being this imminent attack, according to Joel Skousen. He seems to really be beating the war drums for attack sooner rather than later, the sooner the better, against North Korea. And he says that he believes that Trump's got maybe a year at the most, and he needs to go ahead and get it done as soon as possible. He thinks Trump is the man that will do it. He doesn't think anybody else would have done it. He said something about these missile tests that are being conducted. He's miniaturized the warhead or something, but they haven't, as of yet, been able to survive re-entry into the atmosphere. But he thinks maybe in a year they will have overcome that problem or something. But it's just interesting to me because anybody that's followed Joel Skousen, I try and listen to an interview with him at least once a month, and just see what he's saying. And for years and years and years, he's been saying that North Korea is the trigger. That's the trigger of the New World Order, whatever you want to call it. That's what they're going to use as the excuse to trigger World War III. And I was wondering if you had any comment on that. And also, I was wondering if you'd seen this YouTube video, and I didn't even get a chance to watch it. It's pretty short, maybe 7 minutes, maybe. And I just happened to be walking by a computer, and I stooped over and looked it up real quick. And I don't know, I don't know if I buy into it or not, but it appears to be a guy who he's putting himself out there as a uniformed cop in what appears to be, a patrol car, police car. He appears to be in some police uniform. He's got a little light goatee beard, which I don't know. I don't know if that's allowed in most police departments with uniformed cops, police officers, PD. He seems like a young guy. He looks like he's got like a desert camo M4 type carbine up on the roof of his car too, but it's like a desert camo. That seemed a little odd to me. But anyway, he's talking about November 4th, Saturday, November 4th, and some of the stuff that he's hearing, that maybe they're going to try and start riots across the country, and they're going to be attacking police and firefighters, and and then there's this, there is supposedly some government drill I don't know if it's Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, or whatever, that basically, what they would do in the event of, the grid going down.
Yes.
I think nationwide.
Yes.
On November 4th. But have you seen that video of the cop? Do you think that's a real cop?
I haven't seen that video at all, and to go on back to the idea of North Korea, I mean, the whole world is primed for a world war. North Korea could be a trigger that gets everybody shooting at everybody else. So could the invasion of Iran. At this point, we're seeing the rest of the world is waking up to the realization that America's military might is formidable, but it's not invincible. And I know there's a rush to get North Korea dealt with before they do succeed in completing a credible nuclear deterrent, because then the U.S. will not be able to invade them without a huge cost in the process. So anyway, Frank, we're going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And those declassified JFK files have been sorta, kinda, maybe. Apparently, at the last second, Donald Trump chose to block the release of hundreds of these records, bending to CIA and FBI appeals to keep these secrets secret. And the FBI is out there saying, look, you're just going to fuel all those wacky, mentally ill conspiracy theorists if you leave this stuff out. So basically, they released a total of 2,800 other records, but hundreds of them are going to remain secret. Imagine my shock. Now, supposedly, they're being held back for a 6-month review, but something tells me those files, oh my goodness, they were on drive. We'll never get them back now. Golly gee willikers. Now, you remember the Equifax data breach? And a lot of people, Equifax, when they finally came clean on this, they set up this website where you could go on in and they would help you sort out where your information went. And in order to use their assistance, you had to agree to an arbitration agreement. And a lot of people said, don't, because it's going to prevent you from suing them down the road based on how much harm that you suffered. Well, Congress has taken care of that now. Apparently, Congress has voted to disallow consumers from suing Equifax or any other company that has an arbitration agreement. In other words, they're being indemnified. The way the vaccine industry was, the way the computer software industry was, you can't sue them. They've got an arbitration agreement. They've got a vaccine safety court. You just go through these proscribed means of having your issues aired and then promptly ignored. Remember, the definition of fascism is when corporate and government power are aligned together against the general population, and we're pretty much there. Now, do you remember the Deepwater Horizon disaster? And it was partly out of negligence and stupidity. They were drilling very deep into the earth, trying to reach new sources of oil and gas. And the deeper you drill, the higher the pressure. Now, one of the worst things that can happen to an oil drilling rig is called a blowout. And what happens there is you'll hit a gas pocket, and the gas will come roaring up the pipeline. And because it's much lighter in weight than the oil, it travels much, much faster. And behind it will be oil, which is also traveling at a very high rate of speed. And trying to stop that or divert it can break equipment. That's what a blowout is when the gas bubble finishes and the oil hits the top and it starts breaking things. Now, the way you prevent a blowout is with what's called a blowout preventer. Most of the oil exporting nations around the world require the use of automatic blowout preventers that literally listen to the pipe. And when they hear a gas bubble coming up, they shut off there on the bottom of the ocean. In the United States, oil companies are not required to use automatic blowout preventers, but they are required to have manual blowout preventers. And as you know, the manual blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon was 4 years overdue for mandatory maintenance. And the Minerals Management Service, which is the government agency that is supposed to be keeping an eye on America's mines and drilling rigs and pipelines, was doing a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we're going to look the other way so you can save some money. And that's how that disaster came about. And the end result, between all the Corexit and all the oil and everything else, the Gulf of Mexico is now one giant dead zone. There's hardly any sea life, certainly nothing you can eat, left in it. Now, the U.S. deepwater offshore oil industry is in serious, serious trouble because setting up these rigs to be able to drill that deep is very expensive. And like so many other aspects of the industry, it's fallen victim to declining oil prices that were triggered with that poorly thought out oil price war with Russia. And when the Deepwater Horizon was running, the price of oil was over $100 a barrel. And apparently they're starting to take rigs out of service. They only have 37% of the rigs that they had in 2013. Now, the companies that own these massive deepwater rigs, they lease them to the oil companies for $600,000 a day. So it's basically an industry that's falling apart. The money just isn't there anymore. So they're in serious, serious economic trouble. Now, here's a very alarming story. And you kind of wonder what's going on here. Apparently, the government can appoint guardians over you that can just take control of your lives and sell your assets without your consent. And they're targeting the elderly. And so we have this story out of Investment Watch blog, and it tells the story of Rudy and Rennie North. Rudy was 68 years old, a retired broadcasting consultant, lived with his 66-year-old wife, Rennie, in Sun City, Alienta, an active adult community in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, Rennie was recovering from lymphonia and suffering a severe case of neuropathy and had a nurse visit her 5 times a week to help her bathe and dress. Now, here's the important part. Neither Rennie nor Rudy were diagnosed with senile dementia or had undergone any cognitive assessments. As far as anybody knew, they still had all their marbles. And then all of a sudden, this woman knocks on the door, introduces herself as the owner of the company, a private professional guardian, accompanied by 3 colleagues. And apparently this lady told the Norths she had an order from the Clark County Family Court to remove them from their home in this active adult community and take them over to Lakeview Terrace, an assisted living facility in Boulder City, 9 miles from the Arizona border. If the Norths didn't comply, the police would be called and they would be forcibly removed and taken to the facility in an ambulance. So apparently this owner of a company that makes money by being a professional guardian and said that the North's mental state posed a substantial risk for mismanagement of medications, financial loss, and physical harm. And basically filed an ex parte petition that provides an exception to the rule that both parties must be notified of any argument before a judge. So what happened is this went through the court system and the North family had no idea. And she got a couple of letters from a physician's assistant who had seen Rennie only once, questioning whether the patient's husband can effectively take care of the patient at home. And another letter from one of Rudy's doctors who said he was sometimes confused and agitated. And on the basis of that, this private guardian company was given the authority to take over all of their assets, put these people into this nursing home, and basically take control of their finances. That included roughly $50,000 in savings at the Bank of America, which Parks transferred to an account in her own name. Now, in the United States of America, 1.5 million adults are under the care of guardians, either family members or professionals, who collectively control some $273 billion in assets. This is according to an auditor for the Guardianship Fraud Program in Palm Beach County. Little is known about the outcome of these arrangements because states do not keep complete figures on guardianship cases, and in most jurisdictions, the court records are sealed. This seems to be a quasi-legal way to basically plunder the elderly of what little accumulated wealth they have left over. Shove them off into a little tiny box someplace to live out there the rest of their lives. This is in America that they're doing this. Apparently, in most states, anyone can become a guardian by taking a course, as long as you have not been convicted of a felony or recently declared bankruptcy. So it's another racket. It's another racket. It's just another way of basically plundering the American people, plundering a vulnerable segment of our population. It's disgusting here. Let's see. We already covered the Equifax story. We already covered that. We already covered the FEC complaint. We covered the fact that the FBI informant is cleared to testify in Obama. Talked about the surveillance. Apparently, Washington Post is now effectively working as public relations for Amazon. Of course, they were acquired, and you would expect some of that. But apparently, all of these cities across America are trying to lure Amazon to move their second headquarters to their towns. And there's a lot of groveling going on, and apparently New Jersey is offering $7 billion in tax breaks, hoping to reap a massive economic bonanza from the relocation. Now, there is a problem with that because Amazon is very heavily into automation, and they have fewer and fewer human workers, and the human workers who still work for Amazon are starting to talk outside of shop about it's not a very pleasant place to work. Now, Amazon Prime is now offering their customers a smart lock system. Remember, they were talking about while you're away, while you're at work, while you're shopping, they're going to come into your home and deliver products to you. No, I don't think so. Put it in the mailbox or leave it on the front step. You're not coming into my home. I think that one is going to fail as badly as the drone delivery, which has not worked out very well at all. But again, it's a huge business, and they're doing very well, and Amazon gets a lot of the blame for the retail Mageddon. But Amazon's sales volume, while impressive, is really quite a tiny fraction of the overall retail economy, the consumer economy. Now, the consumer economy was crushed in the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud, and it has not recovered, because we've had endless years of changes to tax policy and economics, which is accelerating the wealth inequality in this country, where all the wealth is concentrated at the very top, and there aren't enough of those people to go around to all the shopping malls and buy up all the products that are for sale. And that's why these retail outlets like Lord & Taylor are having to downsize, downscale. Even places like Walmart and Sam's Club, they're having troubles. People just don't have the money to come on in. And I got to tell you, the Christmas stuff is already up all over. We're not even through Halloween, which is next week, and the Christmas stuff is all out there. Oh yes, you got to buy stuff. You know, you're not a real American unless you max out the plastic on more stuff for Christmas here. One thing I can't seem to find though is Christmas wrapping paper. I don't know. It seems like a serious oversight on my part. But I agree with those who say we're looking at some kind of a major economic upset in the very, very near future, because it is all being held together with lies, fraud, and illusion. And corporate media is already talking about we can get the Dow to 30,000. Yeah, it's easy. All you got to do is have the Federal Reserve print up a few billion more imaginary dollars and dump it all over Wall Street. And yeah, you can get the Dow over 30,000. It'll be completely meaningless. Frankly, when they start treating the market indices like sports scores, you know you're in serious, serious trouble. Expecting to see some cheerleaders in skimpy gold lame outfits and pom-poms up there for the opening bell of the stock market, saying, go higher, go higher, go higher. Speaking of drones, apparently yesterday President Trump signed a presidential memorandum creating a new trial program for the commercial use of unmanned aerial aircraft or drones. And the memo is titled Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Pilot Program allows certain communities to be exempt from current safety rules as they test drone operations. Now, that to me is a little scary because what they're saying is we're going to try out these drones and they may crash on you and cause injury to you or damage to your car or home, but the safety rules have to be let go while we work out all the little problems. And maybe this is in response to Amazon wanting to deliver things by drones. What are they going to do? Have the drone come down in front of your door, and then the smart lock opens your door, the drone flies on in, delivers the product, and then flies on out. I don't know. It seems like conflicting technologies to me. But the drones are definitely coming, and they are cool. Let's be very, very honest about it. They're very, very cool. But you do have to be careful. Drones do, unfortunately, fall out of the sky. And I think a lot of people are very concerned about drones invading their privacy, or more to the point, drones being used by the government and the police to invade your privacy. And so far, we're being assured that all of these drones are unarmed. They're simply there to watch. But we know that many of these drones are designed to be armed. They have the lift capability to take on a beanbag gun, an actual shotgun, a taser. So a lot of people they're a little bit concerned about this mechanization of the system of oppression and how they're going to deal with it. Okay, story coming out of Investment Watch blog, world leaders rehearse for global pandemic that will come sooner than we expect, which sounds like that plague coming out of Madagascar. And again, one of the questions that has been asked over the years is why so many scientists were trying to recreate these deadly diseases from the past, like the 1918 Spanish flu. And we know that population reduction is definitely one of the globalists' agenda. It was official U.S. policy. The National Security Study member in 2000, authored by Henry Kissinger during the Nixon administration, said we got to kill all these people off in these third world countries. They get real uppity when we come in to steal their oil and gold and everything else. We just got to figure out a way to take them on out. I mean, if you look at how little bubonic plague there has been in the modern era, and then all of a sudden there's an explosion of it in Madagascar, and now they're warning 9 other countries, that sort of reminds me of the cholera outbreak in Yemen. It feels artificial. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today here, and got a few stories to sort of take us out. This NFL thing it's being so overblown, but it's having an effect. People are turning off the games, and now we're hearing that the networks may cancel 10 Thursday night football games, put something else in that slot because people aren't tuning in. Now, whoever thought they were going to use these football players to make some kind of a statement about America, it has backfired horribly on them. We're getting word now that the House has passed a new budget. Still haven't seen it, but in theory, now they're moving on to tax reform, which I think, to judge by everything else that's come out of this Congress so far this year, it's going to be more about letting the rich keep more of their money and taking more away from the middle class, because that's been the pattern. Now then, here's an interesting story. This is over in RINF.com, and the headline reads, the Thatcher cabinet tried to cover up role in 2,400 deaths from AIDS, hepatitis C. And apparently the story is senior ministers in Margaret Thatcher's government tried to cover up the contaminated blood scandal that led to the deaths of over 2,400 people from AIDS and hepatitis C. And apparently the ministers were trying to reduce any financial aid to the victims who received the contaminated blood, just trying to hush it all up. Now, more than 4,000 British hemophiliacs were given blood contaminated with hepatitis C and HIV by the National Health Service during the 1970s and 1980s. The UK obtained the substance factor 8 from the U.S. due to a shortage in their own domestic blood supply. The factor 8 blood was manufactured from multiple donors, including sex workers, prisoners, and habitual drug users, and there was no screening. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because the Clintons were caught up in this. It's one of the things that is detailed in the Epic of Clinton's Mess. They had this blood program going in the Arkansas prisons where they were going on and collecting blood from these prisoners, and there was no screening being done for hepatitis C. And this blood got sent all over the world, and it made a lot of people very sick, and it killed a lot of people. But it makes money, and that's really all that matters in the United States of America. It's making money. That's what it's all about. And you people are just so picky. You want your medical products to actually be safe. Well, it's almost laughable. You must be a mentally ill conspiracy theorist to doubt what's going on. So, I mean, that is just nasty that there could actually be people who are perfectly okay, you know, infecting other people with hepatitis C and AIDS for a fast buck. But that's the reality of what these people are. And when it got to Britain, they tried to hush it all up because they didn't want to have to pay any damages to the victims. Pretty tacky behavior, I think, here. Oh, apparently they're making the claim. Oh, there's the music. All right, stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of stuff to share with you. We'll be back here tomorrow with the lovely Lady Claire on the Republic Broadcasting Network. So until then, please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.